We wanted to share a spontaneous conversation that emerged during our recording session. While Jazznique was discussing the theme of the podcast and how she resonated with it, she received a phone call which disrupted our conversation. Instead of pausing the recording, we hopped back in and kept it going to see where the conversation took us. She asked a question, and as you can hear, our conversation took a natural turn, and we found ourselves exploring the topic of creating margin and the boundaries around how much we share, how much we disclose around our story and our lived experience and perspective, and if that correlates to us like protecting our ex-partners. It was refreshing and a reminder of unexpected connections and insights that can arise when we allow ourselves to be present and open.
How do I express myself in such a way where it's solely me and my experience? Perhaps he might hear this. Like, how were you able to like separate, like compartmentalize or in a way feel as though, I don't know, what am I trying to say? Like, so I'll put it like this. I've heard people say in the past, like therapist was like, are you protecting him? And I'm like, perhaps, right? Like in a sense, like I want this to be about me. How, like even thinking about like eventually like perhaps potentially wanting to write a book. I always wanted to like, speak on my experience.
Yeah. But not feel like it's an attack on him.
Exactly.
I think for me, whenever I do try to speak about my experience with my ex, is me trying to make sure I voice my accountability and my contribution to the poor outcome of our relationship. Mm-hmm. And also, like, when I bring up specific things that brought harm to me in the relationship or things that I'm still healing from or, like, proving why the relationship was, like, inadequate, I just try to balance it out with, like I said, taking accountability and also acknowledging, like, yes, he has some growth to do, but I also have some growth. I had some growth to do too, and I did play a part in some of these situations. I didn't do all the things right. I think it's bringing in that element of like reflection and understanding, right? Having that grace as well for him, acknowledging that grace vocally and verbally, because I think a lot of times, especially as women, especially as Black women, when we are voicing our experiences, we always get attacked like, well, you guys aren't perfect either, and like, where's the accountability? And it's just like, I think often because we're so passionate about sharing our story, or we're so enthusiastic about sharing our story that it's just like, well, he did this, like just running down the laundry list of things. And we neglect to remember, like, okay, there's two sides to every story, and there's two experiences to every story. One of the things I learned in marriage, I know we haven't got into this episode yet, but one of the things I learned was like two people could be in the same, literally the same, from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Like you and I are sitting in this office. My perspective of what went down in this office can be completely different than yours.
Absolutely.
And I think growing up in the same household, the same parents, same parenting styles for the most part. And it's just like, what? Twins. And so I experienced that in my marriage. I forgot exactly what the situation was, but I remember hearing him say what happened and how he felt, and remember me saying what happened, and I was like, but this is the same. This is and that through that, like,
flabbergasted.
Yes. And so understanding that when I'm coming to tell my story as well, it's like, well, his side might look completely different, or like, all the things. So I think it's awesome that you're being bold and courageous to share your story, and because I feel like it is valuable to share, and also that you're even considering or acknowledging, like, hey, how's this going to affect him if he listens to this, or like others listen to this. I don't want people to see him in a certain light, and like you said, like your therapist is asking you, like, are you trying to protect him, which is fine. Like, one, he's your husband technically, primarily married. So there is going to be an inkling of, like, you want to protect them, right? And then two, you're human and you're a loving human. So it's just like, whether he was your husband or not, like, there is something innate in you. I know this from knowing you, that you want to protect people, especially Black people, especially Black men.
Whenever I explain my lived experience, right, from my perspective, I do always I take a lot of responsibility. I take ownership. I take almost nearly 100%, right? Which, even knowing that, like, it takes two to tango, right? But for you, like, is that sufficient enough, right, to I guess, to feel as though, like, do you feel satisfied in knowing that because you are going to continue to vocalize your testimony, your experience, by addressing your accountability in the relationship, you feel that that is sufficient for moving forward and being okay with, like, saying, like, you know, it is what it is, however it's landed or received on the other end?
Before I answer that question, I think, to the point of, like, what I was saying earlier about, like, that laundry listing, I did go through a season of that. I know for the most part around my circle of friends and family, I did my best not to speak on, like, his failures and downfalls or whatever. But there were two particular people that I felt safe enough to, like, tell them 100%, like, this is what happened. This is what he did. This is how I experienced it. This is, like, how it affected me. But then it still got to a point where I'm just like, okay, let's not go there and, like, clown him or whatever the case. Because I was like, first off, this isn't naturally you as a person. And then two, I was just like, what is the purpose of this, of, like, shedding such a negative light on his character to these two individuals that I felt the most safest to, like, share all the deets and dirt with, right? So that was one thing. I think I got to a point of, like, now I can be okay with however anyone else perceives it, because I know that I'm not operating from that space anymore. And I'm operating from that balancing of, like, holding myself accountable and also having understanding and holding that grace for him as I'm sharing my perspective and my experience of what went down. But yeah, I think I'm satisfied. Like, I can't control no one but myself. And if someone wants to perceive my story in whatever ways they're operating out of, whether that's bitterness or assumed negative intent or whatever the case, however they're operating, I don't have control over that. The only thing I have control over is, like, I made the choice to vocalize this and make it public. And anything can come from that. So it's just like, it's not in my hands anymore. So I just try not to stress too much about it. But it does play a role in what you were saying earlier of, like, really taking this platform serious and really understanding the weight of your voice and your word. I think part of it was, like you said, throughout this process, like, we learned a lot more about ourselves and all the things. And part of my journey with God was, like, I was so fearful of people finding out I was getting divorced, because I was operating in that situation where you're, like, the social pressure and, like, having to do the whole announcement, I'm getting a divorce. And even past that, like, even other mistakes outside of my marriage, you know, just life mistakes, I always been so fearful of telling people. And I got to a point where God was just like, girl, that's just part of you and your life, your testimony, whatever. Like, stand on it. Like,
10 toes down.
Right. Like, and like, so that's how I feel now. It's just like, I don't care who knows. I don't care how they found out, whether I told them or a friend told them or a cousin told them, whatever. It happened, and
it is what it is.
It's what it is. It doesn't necessarily define me, but it is part of my story and my life experience. So, like, why be ashamed or, like, shy away from it, you know? Like, I don't know. But yeah, I'm satisfied with, like, once it's out there, it's in the ether. So, so yeah, that's where I'm at with that. Is that what you anxious about still?
Not anxious. Another way to frame that is just some concerns. Right? And not so, it's just, to your point, that's just the type of person I am, right? Like, going back, I'm the middle child, right? The middle child, the oldest, middle child and the oldest, right? And so it's like, that's just a part of like my nature.
The burden you bear. All right, so that has been a bonus clip of the episode.